Alright, so my name is Jake Tucker. Today I'm going to be talking about how the religious, cultural, and economic repercussions of the Black Plague helped spread the Renaissance and the ideas of the Renaissance. So I chose this topic because the Decameron was pretty much my favorite book we read this semester, especially the parts about Boccaccio talking about the Black Plague. I've always had an interest in societal collapses, especially the fall of the Roman Empire, so I thought this was kind of fitting to correlate the two. And as an economics major, I wanted to explore the plague in more economic terms and talk about how the shifts in society helped start the Renaissance as well. So before I start, I want to go into the structure of the European society before the Black Plague. So at the very bottom, we have people like the serfs and peasants. Above them, we have these kind of very powerful, very traditional medieval guilds. And above them, we have landowners like the lords, and of course the church, clergy. And then underneath over all this is the church as kind of an umbrella. It's the dominant moral and physical force in Europe, and the church pretty much is involved in every facet of everyday medieval life. It's all-encompassing. It is the absolute authority. So before the Black Plague, I want to kind of break down the timeline right now, because it's important to the rest of the argument. So here we have kind of timeline from 1300 to 1550. 1550 is kind of an arbitrary date. So around 1327, Petrarch starts writing his kind of Renaissance ideas, right? These are the foundations of what will become what we know as the Renaissance. So it's things like humanism, individuality, and emphasis on human life, right? Not necessarily the afterlife that the church promotes. And this kind of start of this idea that we were in a dark ages and now we're coming out of it, right? We've lost our way somewhere along these times. And all this is inspired by Greek classics, which are internally more secular. They're separate from the church. Though it's important to note that Petrarch and other philosophers like him were definitely still Christian. They were just fitting these ideas into a Christian framework. But these ideas themselves were definitely more secular and were a challenge to the moral and a physical authority of the church. So now we'll go back here and talk a little bit about the Black Plague. So, of course, we heard it killed around 1/3 of Europe. In fact, it killed over 40% of clergymen serving at that time, and affected all, right? Rich people, poor people, the church, everyone was affected. Nothing the church or medicine at the time could do anything about it. I'll go into more of that later. And throughout this process, the church loses large amounts of money, right? So this Black Plague directly results in two changes in terms of church and the kind of typical authority in medieval culture. It challenges the physical authority of the church and the cultural and philosophical authority of the church. So the physical authority gets challenged because the church really needs to acquire all these new funds. They immediately had to start selling their land to serfs, and they had to start giving them a freedom. And I'll go more into the effects of that later when I talk about the economics of the Black Plague. In order to raise all this money, they started implementing some less than Christian policies. So to start, simony, which they practiced before, but it really ramps up around the time of the Black Plague, which is where they sell church positions and roles to pretty much anyone who buys them. And this is exasperated by the fact that over 40% of clergymen died. So they really need to fill these positions, and as a result, they get filled by these incompetent and greedy clergymen. So an example of this in the text is Friar Chiapolo, who we know is pretty much just a con man, right? Who uses his position to make money and pretty much deceive the population. They start charging for church services like weddings and funerals, and of course, the acts of indulgence, which are pretty much get out of purgatory free cards or get out of excommunication, where people can pay money to the church to kind of to absolve themselves of their sins, which is inherently a non-Christian thing, right? These things are blatantly greedy, and simony especially goes against the canon law of the church. So this erodes the authority because the common people, the elite of society, see these incompetent and greedy clergymen running what's supposed to be this absolute moral authority in the world, right? And I think a great quote about how people start viewing the church is in this day one, story 2 of the Decameron, It's a story about a Christian whose Jewish friend, he wants to convert to Christianity, and his Jewish friend says, okay, I'm going to go to Rome to see what your religion's all about before I make my decision. And the natural reaction of the Christian is, okay, now that he's going to see how the clergy acts in Rome, he's never going to be Christian. And the reason behind this is what Abraham finds when he's there. He says, the Christian asks Abraham, so what did you see while you were in Rome? And he said, what was your impression? He says, a bad one. And may God deal harshly with the whole lot of them. And my reason for telling you so is that unless I formed the wrong impression, nobody there was connected with the church seemed to me to display the slightest sign of holiness, piety, charity, moral rectitude, or any other virtue. On the contrary, it seemed to me that they were also steeped in lust, greed, avarice, fraud, envy, pride, and other sins, and other like sins and worse, if indeed that is possible, that I regard the place as a hotbed of diabolical rather than divine activities. So Abraham goes and he sees this, and the Christian, not even being there, already knows that's going to be his impression before he goes. So the people's respect for the clergymen and the church as a physical representation of the authority of the Bible and Catholicism is greatly weakened because of stuff like this. And then their cultural and philosophical authority, basically the way people perceive the ideas of the church, right? The church's authority to give people a worldview is greatly hurt. And it's pretty much shattered because of the Black Plague. And the first reason is because the plague itself is horrific. It shatters people's notions of what's going on. And I'm going to grab a quote from the Decameron on page 51, where Boccaccio says, "And if not for the fact that I am one of the many people who saw it with their own eyes, I would have scarcely dared to believe it, let alone commit it to paper." That just shows you how powerful this whole experience was for everyone. To kind of usurp authority, you need to be shocked, right? And Black Plague definitely did that. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of what people saw, but without a doubt, it affected people drastically. And so God and the church and the ideas they represented were helpless to this plague, right? The authority people looked up to could do nothing to stop it. And another quote from Boccaccio on page 50 is, "In the face of its onrush, all the wisdom and ingenuity of man were ineffective, nor were the countless petitions of the pious humbly directed to God by the pious, whether by means of formal processing or in any other guise, any less ineffectual." So the church could do nothing. The Catholic viewpoint that is steeped in this authority can do nothing. So basically the idea that following the church would help you is challenged. And people, as we know, fall into hedonism, right? People are gluttonous. They go out in the street. They're drinking all the time. They're following into these physical pleasures. And the other side, it's challenged by religious fanaticism. People are, flagellants, which is the act of whipping yourself, is rampant in these religious fanatic circles, which even though are for the church, it still challenges the church's authority in a larger sense. And the end result, I think, is best summed up by another quote in the Decameron, page 52. "All respect for the laws of God and man had virtually broken down." I think that's really powerful. It's these worldviews that these people have held are completely shattered. And the authority of the church is really in question. So with these old ideas shattered, people naturally look for new ideas. So that's where these ideas come in, where people see these alternative ideas brought on by the Greek classics, where the old ones have failed them, and they rush to accept these.